Hello, my name is James Eric Francis Sr. I am the Penobscot Nation's Director of Cultural and Historic Preservation. In this presentation, I will describe my community's journey to a cultural tourism program and our present Our Town project. Our story begins thousands of years ago. Beginning over 15,000 years ago, a sheet of ice, 2 miles thick, began to recede from what is now the state of Maine and our homeland. Large megafauna animals filled the tundra-like void left in the glacier's wake. The ancestors of the Penobscots and other Wabanaki tribes hunted these animals and made their homes in this landscape. The landscape has essentially been in a constant state of change since the glacier receded, from tundra-like to an inland sea, and then to a vast woodland speckled with ponds and lakes and ribbons of streams and rivers. Wabanaki people adapted through all of these changes. By the time of visitation by foreigners, the Penobscot people lived a riverine, maritime existence. Using the waterways as roadways, Penobscots would travel in their birch bark canoes seasonally in the Penobscot River and adjacent watersheds. Springtime would be spent at important fishing locations on the rivers. The summertime was a coastal time, subsisting off shellfish and gathering and living in greater numbers. This was due to the increase of food sources available. In the fall, however, where the carrying capacity of the land could not support all the people living in one location, family bands, kinship groups, would travel inland to traditional family hunting and gathering territories. Here they would gather and store food and winter over in these remote locations. Then back to important fishing places in the spring. Being and living Penobscot meant you paddled canoes, and you knew vast areas of canoeable territory intimately. Penobscots had a sophisticated knowledge of a vast, vast landscape. As Europeans began exploring the vast river systems of Maine, they realized they needed help. Explorers like Samuel de Champlain in 1604 relied on Penobscots as guides. At about the same time, George Weymouth from England kidnapped 5 Penobscots and took them to England so he could teach them to speak English. He wanted to communicate better with them about the landscape. When Maine became a state in 1820, they commissioned a survey up the Penobscot River to the St. John River via the Allagash and then back the Penobscot River by way of the Aroostook River. To ensure his success, he hired John Neptune, a Penobscot leader and guide. In 1837, when State of Maine geologist Charles T. Jackson made the first official summit of Katahdin, Maine's tallest peak, he hired Penobscot Louis Neptune. 9 years later, Louis was almost hired by Maine's unofficial first tourist as a guide up Katahdin. Henry David Thoreau wrote as he approached Louis Neptune's home.
Learning that there were several wigwams here on one of the Indian islands, we left our horse and wagon and walked through the forest 1/2 mile to the river to procure a guide to the mountain. It was not till after considerable search that we discovered their habitations, small huts in a retired place where the scenery was unusually soft and beautiful, and the shore skirted with pleasant meadows and graceful elms. We paddled ourselves across to the island side in a canoe which we found on the shore. Near where we landed sat an Indian girl, 10 or 12 years old, on a rock in the water in the sun, washing and humming or moaning a song meanwhile. It was an aboriginal strain.
Henry David Thoreau had tried to hire Louis Neptune and agreed on a rendezvous at Mattawamkeag, Maine. However, Thoreau saw an opportunity to travel with some seasoned woodsmen, and left before the agreed upon time. However, on his subsequent trips, Thoreau in 1854 and 1857 hired Joseph Etienne and Joe Polis, respectively. The trip in 1857, the Allagash and the East Branch with Joe Polis, was his longest trip and his most meaningful for Thoreau. He had great admiration for Joe Polis, his Penobscot guide. In the spring of 2014, the Penobscot Nation joined other organizations to implement a canoe trip that retraced Henry David Thoreau's 1857 journey with Penobscot guide Joe Polis. Thoreau wrote about the trip and titled it The Allagash and the East Branch. It was later published as the third section of the Maine Woods. The trip in 2014, identified as Thoreau Wabanaki Tour, was on the 150th anniversary of the publication of the Maine Woods and was featured in Yankee Magazine and on CBS Sunday Morning. Penobscot's James Eric Francis Sr., Jason Pardilla, Christopher Sokolexis, Chris Charlie Brown Francis, and Jennifer Neptune all represented the tribe and their ancestor, Joe Polis. The trip, which took the modern crew 3 additional days, it was done in 13 days by Polis and Thoreau, began in Greenville, Maine, at the foot of the Great Moosehead Lake. They traveled by birch bark canoe up the lake, across Northeast Carey at the top of the lake, into the Penobscot watershed. From the Penobscot, they made their way to the infamous Mud Pond Carey to the Allagash. And once in the Allagash, they paddled to the headwaters and ran the Telos Cut to Webster Pond and Stream. Webster Pond and Stream is a tributary to the East Branch of the Penobscot River. Once in the Penobscot, they paddled downstream until they reached Indian Island, Maine, where Polis lived in 1857. At the end of this trip, Thoreau asked Polis if he was not glad to be home, and Polis remarked that he was always at home. The trip was led by Master Maine Guide Kevin Slater of Mahoosic Guide Service in Newry, Maine. Kevin's partner, Polly Mahoney, who did not participate paddling the river until the last day, but coordinated food, canoe swaps, and personnel's coming and going. On the last night of the trip, the team spent the night on Sugar Island, Penobscot Nation territory. Sugar Island has been designated a cultural tourism use by the Penobscot Nation. In the late 70s, Young American Conservation Corps, YAC, built 10 lean-tos and a ropes course on the southeastern part of the island. It was among the ruins of these lean-tos that the 2014 Thoreau Wabanaki Tour began to see the cultural tourism possibilities. Mahoosic Guide Service had been our partner in cultural tourism since that day. They have acted as mentors, partners, and students to the Penobscot people. They have sponsored 2 trips per year in partnership with the Penobscot Nation. This partnership was a learning experience for the Penobscot Nation around hospitality and provided Mahoosic Guide Service a trip that clients have been asking for years, a trip with indigenous cultural elements. In 2015, the Cultural and Historic Preservation Department landed some funding to jumpstart their cultural tourism program. Generously funded by the Butler Conservation Fund, they accomplished 2 phases on Sugar Island. The first phase was to build a traditional wigwam village. They built one wigwam in a small longhouse on the northeastern end of the island. Second phase funded the rehab of the lean-tos and outfitted the program with canoes, a canoe trailer, life jackets, and paddles. By the summer of 2016, they were ready to host guests. Since 2016, in addition to Mahusit Guide Service, the Penobscot Nation have secured annual grants and contracts with Croca Expeditions from New Hampshire, Kiev Wavis Camps in Maine, and the Boy Scouts of America. In addition, we have hosted professional development training for Portland schools and as well training for the USDA NRCS cultural sensitivity training. Currently, we do about 8 trips per summer. Our home, our food, our river. Penobscot Cultural Tourism, Immersion Experience, and Exhibition Development. The Penobscot Indian Nation, in partnership with the Abbey Museum, a 501c3 museum dedicated to exploring the history and culture of the Wabanaki, propose Our Home, Our Food, Our River, Penobscot Cultural Tourism Immersion Experience and Exhibit Development. Through the NEA's Our Town Grant Program, the Penobscot Indian Nation and Abbey Museum will strengthen a sense of place for Sugar Island through the construction of cultural infrastructure and leverage the placemaking process for the development of an interdisciplinary exhibit design for the Abbey Museum. Sugar Island Cultural Infrastructure. The Penobscot Nation will hire former tribal chief Barry Dana, a tribal elder and holder of cultural practice. Barry will lead a training program to expand cultural infrastructure by constructing traditional wigwam on Sugar Island. This cultural education activity will be documented and will also include 8 apprentices who will learn how to make a wigwam. Food and medicinal plants. Penobscot Nation will incorporate traditional indigenous foods and medicinal plants on Sugar Island to further strengthen a sense of place and cultural experience for the visitors. This is something we have been doing for many years under the tutelage of Jennifer Sapiel Neptune, who is a registered Maine guide, an anthropologist. She also runs the Penobscot Nation Museum. She's a well-known basket maker and is also a bead artist. Jennifer completed a professional certificate program back in February of 2021 through George Washington University School of Business. She is our point person on this project, and she will be the main person who will be working with artists in the community to develop cultural education programs, as well as developing a more robust medicinal and food plants system. One of our partners is the Maine Outdoor Heritage Fund, which the Penobscot Nation received $14,000 for trail improvements. As you can see here, dotted in green, these are the proposed trail systems that we are looking to do. Our basic thing here was to enhance our ability to get into the wetlands on the lower end of the island and access other plants to enhance our medicinal plant and edible plant tours given by Jennifer Neptune. This is in partnership with Bates College, Lewiston, Maine, Their students have been working with us at Sugar Island doing service projects for a few years now. And also, this was sponsored by Baxter State Park. So thank you, Maine Outdoor Heritage Fund. Also, our home, our food, our river includes a Abbey Museum exhibition development. So one thing to say is the Abbey Museum has been going through a decolonizing and indigenizing process. And one of the things that they did was bring in Wabanaki council members. So what this is they approached all the tribes of the Wabanaki, which are the Maliseets, Micmac Nation, Passamaquoddy tribe of Indians, and the Penobscot Nation, and each one of those tribal groups, the chief and council appointed 2 people each to represent their voice at the Abbey Museum. The structure this decolonizing and indigenizing process had put together was to use a canoe as a metaphor, that the Wabanaki Council would be in the stern seat of a canoe and the Board of Trustees would be in the bow seat. How this works, if you're not familiar with canoeing, is that the stern seat tends to look downriver and set the course, whether you're going to go river left or river right, and really kind of plots the course of the canoe. And in this case, also plots the course of the Abbey Museum along this decolonizing and indigenizing process. Now, the Board of Trustees, like the people who sit in the bow of the canoe, are day-to-day operations of the museum. Person in the bow seat are not concerned with what side of the river you're traveling on, but are more concerned with the immediate threats. Is there a rock? Is there a ledge? And so they would take evasive actions. So for this project, Our Home, Our Food, Our River, the Abbey Museum will be developing exhibitions, the process of expanding our cultural infrastructure and cultivating traditional indigenous foods and medicinal plants will be documented and developed into an interdisciplinary exhibition. Jennifer Sapiel Neptune, again, will be working with Lyle Cargis on this process. Jennifer just finished a project at Colby College Museum of Art where she incorporated Wabanaki art into an exhibit. In addition to the exhibition development, we also are including an immersive cultural experience pilot. We'll be working with the Abbey Museum. An immersive cultural experience will be designed and piloted with the museum staff, the board, the council, and also donors. And this would allow them to visit Sugar Island and kind of pilot test our new programs that we will be developing through this process. They will be able to paddle a birch bark canoe, learn how to pole a canoe, try our new menu with traditional foods, and talk to tribal elders who come to the island on a regular basis. We will also be working with the Abbey Museum to do a cultural tourism co-marketing. The Abbey Museum is located in Bar Harbor, Maine, which is the gateway town to Acadia National Park. They get a lot of foot traffic, especially in the summer months, and we want to try to capture that audience and get them to buy in to our Sugar Island cultural tourism trips. In addition, people who visit Sugar Island on our cultural tourism trip, we will be talking about the Abbey Museum and kind of pushing people into that direction. We want to try to increase numbers both at the Abbey Museum and at Sugar Island through this process. And finally, one of our additional partners, Pratt Institute's graduate program in Arts and Cultural Management. They will assist the Penobscot Nation and the Abbey Museum with the development of a strategic marketing plan and cultural tourism development strategy associated with the exhibition, the immersive cultural experience, and general cultural tourism agenda. Dr. Christopher Schramm, lead faculty in the program, has worked with the Penobscot Nation for more than 20 years, assisting with economic development, cultural development, and organization capacity. He will oversee the graduate team of 3 to 5 students. Thank you, AINATA and NEA Our Town Grant Program, for this opportunity to tell our story and the generous funds to be able to implement it. I am James Eric Francis Sr. I am the Director of Cultural and Historic Preservation for the Penobscot Nation, and I am also the co-chair of the Abbey Museum Board of Trustees. On behalf of the Penobscot Nation and the Abbey Museum, we thank you.